A police officer was driving through a deadly snowstorm in Montana when he heard a faint, broken howl beneath the frozen drifts. Digging with his bare hands, he uncovered a German shepherd, half buried, scarred, and bound by rope, its body trembling but its eyes pleading for life. This dog wasn't just a stray. It was a former canine, vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances. Why had it been left to die in the snow? Who was hunting these loyal guardians of justice? What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm came down on Pine Ridge, Montana, with the force of an avalanche. Snow swirled in violent spirals across the valley, obscuring the outlines of houses and barns and swallowing the pine ridges whole. Street lamps flickered, their light suffocated by the white fury of winter. Out on the back road of Lantern's Cut, the sound of chains clanking against frozen pavement echoed against the walls of snow, announcing the lone patrol cruiser cutting through the storm. Inside sat Ethan Carter. 35 years old, his body lean but muscular from years in uniform. His short brown hair was damp under the brim of his cap, his jaw shadowed by fatigue more than stubble. His gray eyes had the distant look of someone who had carried too much loss too early. 3 winters ago, a rock slide on these very mountains had taken his wife, Anna. Since then, silence and solitude were his companions. He lived on the edge of town in a small cabin, spoke little, and worked his shifts with a mechanical dependability that left no space for comfort or joy. Patrolling in weather like this had no purpose but routine. The main roads were closed, the town sheltered indoors. Yet Ethan drove, because when storms raged, memory raged louder, and staying still in his cabin was unbearable. He gripped the wheel tighter, listening to dispatch crackle. Winter advisory upgraded to level 3. All main routes remain closed until further notice. He clicked the radio off. "Copy," he muttered, though no one was listening. The storm shrieked around him, an endless howl of white. But then, beneath it, something shifted, a faint, fractured cry carried by the gale. Ethan slowed the cruiser, heart thumping. At first, he thought it was timber snapping under snow weight. Then it came again. A sound jagged and raw, not wind, not wood, a howl. He killed the engine, and silence closed in heavy as stone. Snow hammered the roof, sleet ticked the windows, but there the sound again, a plea. He opened the door, and the storm lunged at him, icy air knifing across his cheeks. He pulled his coat tight and grabbed his flashlight. His boots crunched through drifts that swallowed him to the shin. "Hello?" he called, but the wind snatched his voice away. The cry came again, weaker this time. He scrambled down an embankment, sliding on ice until his beam caught an unnatural mound beneath a twisted pine. He dropped to his knees, scraping snow away with his gloved hands. His pulse quickened as dark fur emerged under the frost. He dug faster. A muzzle appeared, long, stiffened with ice, then an ear bent oddly. Finally, a pair of eyes cracked open against the glare of his light brown, glassy, yet clinging to life. It was a German shepherd, male, his sable coat streaked with silver now matted by blood and snow. His body trembled, flanks heaving. A rope dug deep into the skin around his neck, leaving raw, angry wounds. His hind leg bore an old scar, rigid and stiff. This was no lost pet. This dog had been abandoned, maybe hunted. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, lowering the flashlight. His voice softened, steady in the gale. The shepherd stirred, then, astonishingly, lifted his head enough to clamp his jaws around Ethan's sleeve. Not to bite, not to fight, but to hold. To beg, "Don't leave me." Something in Ethan's chest cracked. Anna's voice echoed back through memory. "Every creature deserves a hand when it's too tired to walk. You're not dying out here tonight," he said hoarsely. Working quickly, he pried at the rope. The fibers were frozen stiff, biting into fur. Millimeter by millimeter, he freed it, until at last it fell loose into the snow. The shepherd gave a low, broken whimper, but his eyes stayed locked on Ethan's. "You fought to be found," Ethan murmured. "I hear you." He slid his arms beneath the body, one under the chest, one under the hindquarters, and heaved. The weight sagged heavy but too light for the dog's size, a sign of long neglect. Snow soaked his gloves, burned his arms, but he pushed upward, staggering step by step through the drifts. Twice he fell to a knee. Twice he rose again, jaw clenched, lungs burning with cold. At last, the patrol cruiser loomed ahead, headlights half blinded by flurries. He shouldered open the back door and laid the shepherd gently on the seat, then stripped off his patrol jacket and covered the shivering body. The dog's chest rose shallowly but rhythmically. Ethan sat behind the wheel, turned the heater to its highest setting, and glanced into the mirror. The shepherd's eyes, dulled but unbroken, met his own. "Max," Ethan said softly, the name slipping out like instinct. It fit. Strong, simple, unyielding. The dog blinked, slow, deliberate, as though answering. "Good boy, Max," Ethan whispered. The cruiser's chains bit into ice as he steered back onto the road. Snow poured from the ridges in white curtains, headlights carving tunnels through the storm. His gloved hand tightened on the wheel as a memory threatened again, Anna's laugh. The rock slide, the silence afterward, but he shook it off. Tonight was not about memory. It was about survival. He checked the rear view again. Max had shifted faintly under the jacket, a paw dragging forward until it touched the seat, as if reaching toward him. Ethan's throat tightened. He pressed the accelerator gently. "Hang on," he said into the storm. "We're heading for the cabin. Just a few more miles." The mountain howled, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt something pushing back against the silence. In the back seat, Max's shallow breath matched the rhythm of the chains on the road. Together they moved through the blizzard toward firelight that waited somewhere ahead. The blizzard showed no mercy as Ethan Carter trudged through the snow, cradling the injured dog in his arms like fragile glass. The patrol vehicle had stalled less than half a mile from the old ranger cabin, its tires half buried in a drift. No use trying to dig it out now, not with wind shrieking like banshees through the trees and visibility slashed to near nothing. Max barely stirred. His fur, matted and icy, clung to Ethan's jacket. The big shepherd's breaths were shallow, but his heart still beat, faint and faithful, under Ethan's hand. The cabin emerged like a phantom from the storm boards weathered, windows crusted with frost, a sagging porch half collapsed on one side. Ethan shoved the door open with his shoulder. The hinges groaned like an old man waking from a long, cold sleep. Inside, the air was frigid but dry. Dust motes floated in beams of dull light sneaking through warped planks. Ethan laid Max on a faded wool blanket in the corner near the old stone hearth, then set to work fast. The fireplace hadn't been used in years, but someone, probably the last ranger posted here, had left a bundle of kindling and 2 split logs stacked neatly beside it. Ethan struck the emergency match with numb fingers, coaxing life from dry wood. Smoke curled, then flame bloomed. Warmth. He exhaled for the first time since digging Max out of the snow. He knelt beside the dog. "Hey, buddy, hang in there." Max didn't lift his head, but one ear twitched. Ethan unzipped his patrol coat and gently packed snow-soaked fur with the flannel inside. Blood had dried around the deep rope burns on Max's neck, and his hind leg looked swollen. The scars told stories Ethan didn't want to guess. One paw was cracked and raw. Ethan remembered enough from field triage flush, wrap, elevate, but he wasn't a vet. The wounds were bad. He reached for the cabin's dusty radio, praying. Static hissed back. He adjusted the antenna, tried again. "Anyone on this frequency, this is Officer Ethan Carter from Pine Ridge PD. I've got a severely injured K9. I need medical assistance. Coordinates, near Old Pine Hollow Cabin. Storm conditions. Repeat storm conditions." Nothing. Static, like the wind outside whispering bad news. Miles away, in her modest home on the edge of Pine Ridge, Dr. Nora Williams, The town's 42-year-old vet had just finished checking the weather updates when she heard it, a faint voice. She froze. Her radio scanner, always humming in the background, picked up the broken message. Ethan's voice, distorted, but clear enough. Injured, K9. Need medical. Nora was a sturdy woman with streaks of gray in her tied-back brunette hair, broad-shouldered from years of hoisting injured dogs into exam tables. Tough, brisk, and no nonsense, except when it came to animals. After losing her husband 10 winters ago in a freak avalanche, she'd made it her mission to care for every stray and wounded creature the mountain brought her. She leaned close to the radio. "Say again, officer? Ethan, is that you?" Silence. Snow had likely swallowed the signal, but that was enough. She was already grabbing her bag, stuffing syringes, wraps, antiseptic, and thermal blankets into a canvas pack. She didn't know exactly where Ethan was, but she had a good guess. The Pine Hollow cabin wasn't on any modern map, but she remembered treating a ranger there years ago. Back at the cabin, Ethan sat beside Max, hands around a mug of hot coffee from a dusty emergency kit he'd found. Steam curled in the amber firelight. "Where'd you come from, Max?" he asked softly. The dog's eyes flickered open, tired, but present. Ethan reached for the battered leather collar still hanging loosely from Max's neck. No tag, but an engraving. Unit 6K, do not separate. A retired K9? Or, not retired. Missing? Ethan's mind drifted. To Sarah. To the night the call came, she had taken the road alone, back when he was still on duty. Her crash had occurred during a storm, just like this one. No closure, no goodbye, just a ravine and a wreckage. The storm outside raged harder, pelting the tin roof like bullets. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl. Ethan's head snapped around. Max's head had lifted barely, but enough. His lips curled, teeth bared. A warning. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and rose. Outside, someone or something had stepped on the snow-dusted porch. The door creaked louder now, under pressure. Wind. Or... Ethan reached the door and flung it open, flashlight beam slicing through the white veil of snow. Nothing, just wind and swirling flakes. He stepped out. No tracks yet, but someone had been there. Back inside, Max had collapsed again. But his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, remained on the door. Even near unconsciousness, the dog's instincts hadn't failed him. He had sensed danger. Whoever or whatever was out there, Max had warned him. And in that flicker of warning, Ethan realized something. Max wasn't just any dog. He was trained, still loyal, still trying to protect. Ethan knelt, pressing his hand gently on Max's paw. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You've done enough." He turned up the fire, reinforced the door with a chair, then sat beside the shepherd once more. The storm howled. But inside, something had shifted. The cabin wasn't just shelter. It was the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. The storm had eased to a haunting silence by the time headlights cut through the fog, bouncing off the twisted trees outside the cabin. Nora Williams pulled her Jeep to a slow stop, her windshield wipers clicking against the last stubborn flakes. She stepped out into the cold, shoulders squared against the wind, her boots crunching over ice. The vet was in her early 40s, tall and strong-boned, with weather-creased skin and tied-back brown hair that shimmered faintly with strands of gray. Her eyes were sharp and calm, the kind that had seen both joy and heartbreak without flinching. She carried a heavy canvas medical bag across her shoulder, one hand gripping a flashlight. As she approached the porch, the cabin door creaked open and Ethan stood silhouetted in firelight. "You came?" he said, voice rough from cold and long silence. "You didn't leave me much choice, Carter," Nora replied. "You really should learn how to enunciate over radio static." Ethan gave a faint smile, stepping aside to let her in. She walked straight toward the huddled form near the hearth. "So, this is him," she said, kneeling. Her breath hitched slightly as her fingers ran over the shepherd's fur, parting the matted sable coat. Older, 10, maybe 11. Good weight, but She paused. These scars are fresh. Not all of them are from the cold. Ethan crouched beside her. He was tied to a fence post. No ID tag. Just this. He handed her the cracked leather collar. The metal buckle had rusted, but the engraving was legible. Nora's brow furrowed as she turned it in her hand. Unit 6K, wait. Her fingers stopped near the inner loop of the collar. She squinted, then carefully parted the folds with a gloved finger, and there burned faintly into the underside of the leather was a crude, jagged mark, a twisted letter V intersecting a broken circle. This isn't military, she murmured. It's not police, either. Ethan. This is a gang brand. I've seen it before, 2 years ago. A pit bull came through my clinic, half dead. Same symbol. He was used in fights. Ethan's expression darkened. Nora continued, gently feeling the dog's limbs. They mark animals they own. Or rather, the ones they steal. This poor guy wasn't just lost, he was taken. A long pause followed, broken only by the crackling fire and Max's labored breath. Ethan rose, pacing toward the window. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent now. Back when I worked in Georgia, he said slowly, we had reports of K-9 units going missing. First one in South Carolina, then 2 from Tennessee. Always just vanished. No struggle, no trace. You think this one's one of them? Nora asked. He knew things. He moved like he'd been trained. And back at the cabin he warned me. Growled before I heard a sound. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Whoever had him wasn't some backyard amateur. Max stirred weakly, shifting his weight with a soft whine. His eyes, though rimmed with pain, were alert now, tracking both of them. Nora gently touched his forehead. Easy, boy. You're safe now. She reached into her bag, pulling out antiseptic and gauze. As she cleaned the wound around his neck, she said quietly, this was deliberate. Rope burned this deep. They didn't just tie him. They restrained him for long periods. Ethan knelt again, his voice softer now. When I mentioned K-9 unit, his ears dropped, but his eyes, they lit up. Nora looked up. Recognition? He nodded. It's like he remembered who he was. The cabin was still for a moment, wrapped in the hush of understanding. Then Max did something that made both of them freeze. With great effort, the dog lifted his head just slightly and nudged his nose toward Ethan's hand. Not out of fear, not out of pain, out of trust. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I think, Nora said softly, he's imprinting on you. Ethan blinked. What do you mean? He's identifying you as his handler. Trauma does that sometimes. The dog loses their original bond, then latches on to the first person who treats them with care. Max's gaze didn't waver from Ethan. His eyes, brown and glassy with age, still held the flicker of duty. Outside, the snow continued its quiet descent. Nora finished bandaging the leg and packed up slowly. He needs warmth, food, and about 2 weeks of rest before we can even think about full recovery. If infection doesn't set in, he's got a shot. I'll make sure he gets it, Ethan said. I know you will, she replied, standing. He watched her tighten her scarf, preparing to leave. You sure you can make it back? Nora gave him a look. I'm not the one with a half-dead dog in a storm cabin. Fair enough. At the door, she paused. One more thing. If this dog really is from a stolen K-9 program, there are records. I can pull some strings, reach out to a friend at the state registry. Quietly. Ethan nodded. Do it. She gave a small, grim smile. And Ethan, be careful. If they branded him, they won't be happy he got away. With that, she disappeared into the flurry. Ethan closed the door, then turned back toward the hearth. Max had dozed again, though one ear flicked faintly at the sound of his boots. He sat down beside the dog, the fire casting long shadows across the wall. No longer just a stranger, no longer just a rescue. Max had become something more. A companion, a remnant of something broken, a story still unfolding. And in that small, quiet cabin, amidst the scent of wood smoke and antiseptic, Ethan Carter realized. They were both survivors of storms they hadn't chosen. And maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back together. The fire had burned low, casting soft orange shadows across the cabin walls. Ethan sat in the armchair near the hearth, Max lying curled on the thick blanket beside him, breath shallow but steady. The wind outside had stilled, replaced by the eerie silence of snow-blanketed woods. That kind of silence wasn't peace. It was the hush before something stirred. Ethan leaned back, eyes half-lidded. He hadn't meant to doze off, just a moment to rest, but his body, worn from years of war and the more recent battles of the soul, betrayed him. Max stirred beside him, shifting slightly, and Ethan glanced down with a small smile. The shepherd's head twitched in a dream, his ears flicking with distant echoes of memory. Then came a sound barely there. A crunch. Snow, not too far from the porch. Ethan was instantly upright. His hand instinctively reached for the old sidearm he kept in a drawer near the fireplace. Quietly, he moved to the window, lifting the corner of the curtain with 2 fingers. Nothing but white. Until he saw it, a faint shimmer, then gone. Another closer now. A beam of light, not moonlight, but the pale arc of a flashlight weaving between trees. Ethan's breath caught. His fingers tightened on the curtain. Not a hiker, not at this hour. Another beam joined it, then a third, distant but circling. They were sweeping the woods. His mind raced. The storm had barely let up hours ago. No one came out in this unless they were desperate, or hunting. He turned toward Max just in time to see the dog stir. The shepherd's ears perked, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent through the windseam of the door. Then, with a growl deep from his chest, Max tried to rise. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, dropping beside him. But Max wouldn't stay down. With a shaky strength Ethan hadn't seen since they brought him in, Max dragged himself toward the door. He barked once, loud and sharp, then again, more aggressive, a fierce, hoarse warning. The flashlight beams froze, then scattered. Ethan rushed to the door, flinging it open just in time to catch the sight of shadows moving swiftly back into the deeper parts of the forest. Gone in seconds, like ghosts in the snow. He stood there, letting the cold bite into him. Whoever they weren't expecting a warning system with teeth. He closed the door, bolted it, and sat on the floor beside Max, running a hand along his fur. "You scared them off," he said softly. "Good boy." The next morning, the sun broke through, icy and pale. Nora returned just past 9 a.m., her tires cracking through the crusted snow as she pulled into the clearing. She stepped out quickly, her breath puffing in the cold, expression tight. "I got your message," she said before Ethan could speak. "Show me." Ethan nodded toward the tree line. 3 lights, moving slow, watching. She followed his gaze. "They'll be back." There was a pause, then Nora looked at Max, now lying more alert near the hearth. "He barked?" "Loud enough to scatter them." She gave the faintest nod, then stepped toward the couch. After a moment, she broke the silence. "You ever lose someone, Ethan?" Her tone was even, but something beneath it vibrated raw. He hesitated. "Yes." She lowered herself onto the edge of the couch. "I lost my brother, Owen, 3 years ago. He was with Animal Protection Services, worked undercover, exposing illegal fighting rings." Ethan listened, silent. "They sent him into a place near El Paso, cartel-backed operation, promised he'd have backup. He never came back." She looked down at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. "They said they found the dogs, but not Owen, only his badge, blood-stained." Ethan's jaw tightened. Nora met his gaze. "That's why I didn't ask questions when you called. That's why I'll keep coming. Because if there's even the slightest chance that Max here was part of something bigger, something tied to what happened to Owen, I'm not letting it die in the snow." Ethan exhaled slowly. "We need to prepare." Nora nodded. "I've got contacts. I can get a trail cam or 2 out there, motion sensors. But you need to be careful. These people aren't amateurs." Ethan glanced down at Max. The dog's eyes met his. There was no fear there, just steady defiance. As they planned, snow began to fall again, quiet and unassuming. The peace was brittle, and beneath it, danger lingered. That night, Ethan sat beside Max again. The shepherd had dozed off, twitching slightly in his sleep. Ethan found himself watching the firelight dance on the scarred fur, tracing the lines of old pain and the stubborn heartbeat beneath it all. This dog, this cabin, this snowy nowhere, it had become more than just a place of escape. It was a line drawn, a stand taken. Ethan stayed awake long after the fire had dimmed, listening. And Max, even in sleep, stayed facing the door. Together, they waited. By dawn, the wind had dulled to a low hum, dragging its claws across the snowbanks like a tired beast. The sky was a pale bruise, gray with a hint of light pushing through. Ethan stood at the cabin's threshold, one hand resting on the doorframe, eyes scanning the forest beyond. The storm had quieted, but it wasn't peace. It was the eerie breath before something stirred again. Behind him, Nora zipped up her heavy green parka and adjusted the strap of her utility bag. She wore dark jeans tucked into scuffed snow boots, and her copper hair, tied in a low ponytail, peeked from beneath a knitted black beanie. Her face was drawn with determination, but the weight of the past night still lingered in the pinch between her brows. "We won't get another chance like this," she said, stepping beside him. "Fresh tracks fade fast." Ethan gave a nod, then looked down at Max. The old German shepherd had recovered some of his strength. Though his body still bore the stiffness of old injuries and recent exhaustion, his eyes were clear. When Ethan gestured, Max rose slowly, favoring his back leg but alert, tail low and ears perked. His sable coat, streaked with silver, bristled as the wind carried the scent of something foul, something that didn't belong in the forest. They moved together into the snow-drenched woods, Nora at the front, Max sniffing ahead, and Ethan bringing up the rear. They followed the trail left by the intruders, shallow impressions in the snow where heavy boots had pressed through the crust, and, farther ahead, the unmistakable pattern of tire tracks, 2 sets, wide and deep. Half a mile in, they came to a narrow clearing. A rusty path veered off the main trail, obscured by thickets and low-hanging pine branches. The tire marks led directly down it. Nora knelt to inspect the snow. Recent. Maybe 6-7 hours old. Could be from the same ones watching the cabin. Ethan scanned the area. They stopped here. The snow around the tracks was disturbed drag marks, broken twigs, and a large rectangle pressed into the snow. Max suddenly growled, pulling Ethan to the right. The dog's nose went to the base of a snow mound. Then he began to dig frantically. Moments later, he uncovered a scrap of navy blue fabric, torn and crusted with blood. Ethan crouched beside him and retrieved it with gloved fingers. "A sleeve," he murmured, "from a heavy coat." Nora leaned over. "There's a tear here, deep, like a bite. Canine." She stood and began brushing snow from a strange formation in the clearing, a low metal structure hidden beneath a tarp half buried in the snow. As the fabric peeled away, a steel-barred cage emerged, bent in one corner. Its base was stained with something dark that had frozen in jagged streaks. "Dog crate," she said grimly. "Big enough for a shepherd or two." There were blood trails leading away from it. Old, some washed away by snowmelt, but others fresher. A grim pattern revealed itself, multiple animals dragged in different directions, some resisting. The cage hadn't just been used. It had been emptied recently. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "They're running a line through the woods, using the storm to move undetected. And they left this one behind." Nora nodded toward Max, who now circled the area, tail low, nose still searching. "But why?" "Too injured," Ethan said. "They figured he wouldn't survive, or he got away and they didn't have time to chase him." Max returned to Ethan and dropped something at his feet. Another scrap of fabric. This one was lighter, synthetic, with a name tag partially burned into it. H. Fay. Nora bent down. "That's not from a coat. That's from a uniform." Ethan's breath caught. "Military issue?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Animal control." The wind picked up again. Back at the cabin, Ethan placed both fabric scraps in sealed bags Nora had brought. They wouldn't last long outside, and he didn't want to risk losing evidence. As the snow picked up again, he left Max resting inside and drove into town, the sleeve and tag in the passenger seat. The sheriff's office was nestled between a bait shop and a post office that still smelled like paper and old glue. Sheriff Landon Briggs was a large man in his 50s, with thick arms, a round stomach, and a closely cropped beard that had more gray than black. He wore his uniform like a loose shirt, always half unbuttoned and stained with coffee or tobacco. Briggs didn't look up as Ethan stepped into his office. "Carter," he said, voice gravelly, "you don't show your face much since retirement. I need you to take a look at this." Ethan placed the sealed bag with the bloodied sleeve on the desk, then added the torn uniform tag. Briggs sighed, finally glancing up. His eyes flicked to the evidence. He leaned back. "Where'd you find this?" "In the woods near my cabin. There's more cage, tracks, blood. I think it's connected to the illegal dogfighting ring Nora's been tracking." Briggs raised a hand, already shaking his head. "Look, I appreciate the concern, but winter does strange things. Wolves, coyotes, even mountain lions." "This was no mountain lion," Ethan interrupted. "There were tire tracks, flashlights, organized." Briggs's jaw tensed. He tapped the bagged sleeve with a pen, then pushed it aside. "Ethan, you're retired. Nora's been barking up that tree for years and found nothing. You want to spend your time chasing phantoms, fine. But I've got a town to run and limited manpower." Ethan stared at him. "This isn't nothing. You have blood, uniforms, cages." "I said drop it." Briggs stood, his tone final. "Let the state handle this when the snow clears. If they find anything, fine. Until then, I'm not authorizing any resources for a ghost hunt." Ethan left, furious. That night he sat on the porch, Max resting at his feet. The sky had cleared into a blanket of stars, but the air held tension like a taut wire. Max lifted his head once, ears flicking toward the woods, but no movement followed. Inside the cabin, Ethan unfolded a map Nora had given him. It marked a series of abandoned roads and logging trails, places the traffickers might be using. If the law wouldn't act, they would. And Max, it seemed, wasn't done fighting. The morning air bit deep, sharper than the last. The sun had yet to pierce through the heavy veil of frost that clung to the pine branches around Cedar Grove. Ethan stood outside the cabin, cell phone pressed to his ear, boots crunching lightly over hardened snow. The call had finally connected. "Marcus, it's me," he said. "I need your help. It's about a trafficking ring. Animal-related, possibly federal." There was a beat of silence on the line before a familiar voice came through, measured, deep, and lined with years of law enforcement discipline. "I wondered when you'd reach out," said Agent Marcus Hale. Marcus had once been Ethan's field instructor when he trained with a federal task force years ago. Now in his early 50s, Marcus had aged into a quiet, composed authority. He was African American, with a shaved head and sharp features softened only by a neatly trimmed gray beard. His voice had a slow drawl, but his eyes missed nothing. Marcus had retired from field work, now coordinating investigative leads from Denver, but he'd always told Ethan, "Call me when you see a pattern others ignore." Within 5 hours, Marcus arrived at Ethan's cabin in a matte gray SUV, alone. He stepped out in a dark trench coat, layered over a tactical vest, his badge clipped inside. Nora met him with a skeptical glance, but quickly warmed when Ethan introduced them. "You trust him?" she asked quietly. "With my life," Ethan replied. That evening, the trio studied the forest map Nora had annotated. One trail in particular caught Marcus's eye, a cut through the ridge that ended near an abandoned lumber facility by Frozen Creek. "This place ever used recently?" he asked. Nora shook her head. "Not officially, but last spring a group of hikers heard animal sounds coming from there, and someone left behind syringes and empty crates." Marcus leaned in. "Sounds like a stash site. Low traffic, no eyes. Let's pay it a visit, quietly." They waited until nightfall. The road to Frozen Creek was barely passable in winter. Snow had drifted over parts of it, forcing them to park the SUV and proceed on foot. Max led the way, his stride steady despite the ice underfoot. The moonlight flickered through the trees like a nervous heartbeat. Frost clung to Ethan's eyelashes as they approached the crumbling structure, an old sawmill with faded red siding and a collapsed awning. The place stank of rust, oil, and something more sinister fear, perhaps, or blood. Max paused at the entrance, ears rigid, and let out a low, guttural growl. Inside, the space was littered with debris-splintered boards, cracked tiles, and rusted tools. But what caught their attention was in the back corner, a makeshift cage area partitioned with plywood and chicken wire. Ethan's flashlight passed over rows of syringes, some capped, others still slick with residue. There were metal muzzles, choke collars, and 2 used tranquilizer guns. Nora stepped closer, examining labels on a crate. Ketamine, xylazine, animal-grade sedatives. Next to them, Marcus crouched and lifted a logbook, half covered in dust. "Shipment entries," he muttered. "Mostly code names, but locations match animal shelter routes. This operation's bigger than backwoods cruelty. It's organized." Just then, Max let out a sharp bark and ran toward the far wall. His claws skidded on the concrete as he sniffed violently at a section of paneling. Ethan followed and noticed scratch marks at the base fresh ones. Without hesitation, Marcus drew a folding knife and pried at the panel. It creaked, then gave way, revealing a narrow wooden hatch. Beneath it, a steep ladder disappeared into darkness. "Storage basement," Ethan whispered. Marcus led the descent, followed by Ethan and Nora. Max stayed at the top briefly before bounding down beside them. The basement air was cold and thick, like a sealed tomb. Rows of cages lined the walls, some still with name tags: Luna, Casper, Duke. Ethan's jaw clenched. "They were K9 units," Nora said, her voice catching. "All of them." She moved to a dusty desk at the far end and found a binder bound with twine. As she opened it, yellowed pages crinkled under her fingers. Inside were records, photos, dates, locations. Dozens of them. Dogs marked as missing in action. But many had survived, only to end up here. Max sniffed the edge of the binder and gave a low whine. Ethan reached down and ran a hand over his head. "You were one of them, weren't you?" he murmured. "Not just one," Nora added, flipping another page. "His old name was written here." She pointed to a photo. It was grainy, but it was clearly Max. Younger, ears both upright, no scar yet on his leg. Name: Titan. Handler: Sergeant Raphael Lindholm. Marcus inhaled slowly. That unit was based out of Arizona. Disbanded after a raid went bad. Official report said 3 dogs went missing. Max looked up at Ethan as if confirming it all. They documented the evidence, Nora photographing each crate and record. Marcus bagged the syringes and logbooks. Then they heard it. A distant engine. Low and growing closer. "Time to go," Marcus ordered. They escaped through a back exit and disappeared into the woods just as headlights crept down the logging road. From the shadows, they saw 2 men enter the mill, both wearing tactical coats and earpieces. "I know that face," Marcus whispered, pointing. "Vance Torino, ex-private contractor, wanted in Nevada for illegal animal testing." They slipped away under cover of snow and darkness. By the time they returned to Ethan's cabin, dawn was breaking over Cedar Grove again. The sun caught the frost in a pink haze, as if the woods were holding its breath. Ethan sat on the steps, Max at his side, while Marcus called in the findings to Denver. Nora sat inside, cross-referencing names from the binder with public K9 memorials. They'd found proof, they'd found names, and Max knew Titan had led them to it all. The silence in the cabin was different now. Not the comforting quiet of dawn snowfall, but something taut, stretched thin with tension. Ethan sat at the table sorting the evidence they'd gathered at Frozen Creek Photos, the binder, sedative vials, all now neatly organized and awaiting transport. Max, still stiff from the overnight trek, lay curled by the fireplace, his breaths steady but shallow. Nora sipped burnt coffee by the window, her eyes flicking nervously toward the tree line. Marcus was pacing, phone to his ear, speaking in hushed tones. "No backup yet," he muttered after hanging up. "Denver's team won't be here for another 6 hours. Stormfront's delaying them." Ethan nodded. "Then we sit tight." But that plan didn't last long. A low rumble outside drew everyone's attention. A patrol truck, old, battered, and unmistakable, came up the drive. Sheriff Warren Briggs. The man had ruled Cedar Grove like a fated king with a badge. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven despite his 62 years, Briggs always wore his tan uniform crisp, boots polished, and a silver 6-point star glinting on his chest like a threat. He stepped out alone, his gloved hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. "Morning," he called, voice honey-slicked but hollow. "Got word you've been poking around Frozen Creek." Ethan and Marcus exchanged a glance. Nora stiffened. Briggs didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, boots shedding snow, and shut the door behind him. "You boys forget to tell the local sheriff what you're up to." "Didn't think you'd be interested," Marcus said coolly. Briggs smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm always interested in folks sticking their noses where they don't belong." He looked around, then at the binder on the table. "That what I think it is?" "You tell me," Ethan said evenly. Briggs stared a moment longer, then slowly drew his weapon. "Step away from the table." The mood turned icy. Nora gasped. Marcus's hand went to his own holster, but Briggs was faster, aiming straight at Ethan. "I warned you, didn't I?" Briggs snarled. "You could have just lived out your hermit life in peace." "What did you do to those dogs, Briggs?" Ethan demanded. "You ran this whole ring, didn't you?" "I didn't run anything. I allowed it." "Big difference," Briggs snapped. "Sometimes good men make deals with bad people to keep things quiet, to keep order." Just then, a second vehicle pulled up outside. It was Nora's car, but the man who stepped out wasn't Marcus's agent or a deputy. It was Deputy Clint Saunders, tall and wiry with twitchy hands and sunken eyes. He was in his mid-30s, always nervous, and often found trailing behind Briggs like a loyal mutt. Except now, his face was pale as chalk. He entered and whispered something into Briggs's ear. The sheriff turned, eyes hardening. "Well, looks like you've got more friends than I thought." He looked at Nora. "You, come here." She froze. Briggs cocked the hammer. "Now!" Ethan stepped forward. "Leave her out of this." Briggs motioned toward Saunders. "Tie her hands. Take her outside." Clint hesitated. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "I said do it!" Trembling, Clint obeyed, pulling a length of cord from his coat and gently, almost apologetically tying Nora's hands. She kept her chin up, eyes defiant. Max, until now silent, began to growl. He rose to his feet, tail low, hackles up. "Shut that mutt up," Briggs said. "You don't give him orders," Ethan replied, voice low and tight. Briggs's gun shifted, pointing straight at Ethan again. "This ends now." And then Max moved. In a blur of sable and silver, the aging German shepherd leapt forward. Briggs fired once. The crack of the shot rang like thunder. Max collided with Ethan mid-lunge, pushing him down. The bullet meant for Ethan tore into Max's side instead. The dog landed hard, yelping, a flash of red blossoming across the snow. "No!" Ethan shouted, scrambling to his knees beside Max. Before Briggs could take another shot, Marcus fired. One clean shot to the shoulder. Briggs' gun flew from his hand as he screamed and fell back. Clint dropped his own weapon and raised his hands. "I didn't sign up for this," he stammered. "I didn't know it'd go this far." Nora, freed quickly by Marcus, rushed over, tears streaming. Max lay in the snow, his breaths ragged, eyes fluttering. Ethan pressed his jacket against the wound, whispering over and over, "Stay with me, boy. Stay with me." They wrapped Max in a blanket and placed him gently in the back seat of Marcus's SUV. Briggs, cuffed and bleeding, sat handcuffed in the snow, spitting curses. Clint was detained but not arrested yet. His role remained unclear. The storm had started, snow falling heavily around them as the cabin lights glowed behind like a distant memory. Inside the SUV, Nora stroked Max's ear while Ethan drove. "He saved your life," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. Marcus called the Denver team again. "Tell them to bring medics, And get someone to secure the sheriff's department. It's rotten to the core." No one spoke after that. The only sound was Max's faint breathing and the wind wailing like a morning hymn over the pine trees of Cedar Grove. The emergency lights from the convoy of vehicles cast flickering red and blue across the snow-covered trees as they reached the Cedar Grove Veterinary Clinic, an old whitewashed building nestled behind the town's post office. It had once been a farmhouse, converted by Dr. Elsie Reynolds, a slender woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked brown hair, deep-set eyes magnified behind thick glasses, and a voice that always seemed too calm for the emergencies she handled daily. Her kindness was legendary in Pine Ridge, yet it came from surviving her own heartbreak. A barn fire 10 years ago had claimed her horses, and she'd rebuilt this clinic with her own hands. Ethan barely stopped the SUV before flinging the door open. "He's still breathing," he said, lifting Max, bundled in flannel and stained red, into his arms. Dr. Reynolds ushered them in without a word, her hands already pulling on surgical gloves. Inside the warmth of the clinic, Nora paced while Marcus phoned federal agents, reporting the arrest of Sheriff Briggs and requesting a transport team for the remaining gang members. Clint Saunders had confessed everything, how he'd seen dogs being smuggled out in crates marked supplies, how Briggs paid off inspectors, and how Nora's younger brother Jamie had been blackmailed into working as a courier. Nora's hands trembled as she texted her mother. Jamie had disappeared over a year ago. Rumors said he'd run off with bad influences. No one imagined he'd been trapped in the backwoods under threat of death. But now, with Briggs detained, his hideouts raided, and his men confessing, everything would come to light. Hours passed before Dr. Reynolds emerged, her smock stained but her face calm. "He'll live," she said softly. "He lost a lot of blood, and we had to remove the bullet, but his heart, that dog has the heart of a warrior." Ethan, who had been silent until now, exhaled slowly. His eyes gleamed. "Thank you." "You saved him just as much," she said. "Most dogs wouldn't have made it through the night in that storm." The days that followed were a whirlwind. FBI units swept through Pine Ridge and its outskirts. Warehouses disguised as supply depots were raided, containing cages, documents, and cash. Local deputies previously thought loyal were exposed, and others like Deputy Reed, a stocky woman with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense glare, stepped up, helping secure the town. Reed had been suspicious of Briggs for years, but without proof, she had kept quiet. Now she served as interim sheriff. Meanwhile, Jamie was found in a makeshift workshop inside an abandoned ranger station. Thin and bruised, the 19-year-old had overgrown curls and cautious blue eyes like his sister. When Nora hugged him, he barely responded, trauma woven too deeply into his frame. But later, when she knelt beside him in the clinic waiting room, holding a sandwich and whispering about home, he whispered, "Is Max okay?" Ethan watched them quietly. A thought began to form. By the time the courthouse convened, snow had started to thaw. Briggs was brought in shackled, his face sullen. The courtroom buzzed with townspeople, ranchers, store owners, kids who'd grown up thinking Briggs was a war hero. The revelations of what he'd hidden shattered that image. At the back of the room, Ethan stood beside Marcus and Nora, wearing a clean gray coat. His eyes, however, kept drifting to the German shepherd at his feet. Max was thinner now, one leg wrapped but upright. His ears twitched at every sound, and though he no longer bore a badge, there was dignity in how he sat, alert, silent, unwavering. After the trial, something unexpected happened. The town council called for a public ceremony, not just to mark Briggs's fall, but to celebrate those who had exposed the rot and restored hope. And so, under the soft sky of late winter, Pine Ridge held its first community gathering since the pandemic. It took place in the open field behind the library. Snow still dusted the grass, but lanterns lined the pathways, and kids with red scarves darted between benches where elderly couples sat sipping cider. At the center stood a small wooden stage. Ethan approached it slowly, unsure how he felt. He had never liked attention. But when the mayor, a petite woman named Belinda Griggs, with a commanding presence and a shock of curly white hair, waved him up, he complied. Behind him, Marcus gave a proud nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Griggs said into the microphone, "today isn't just about justice. It's about redemption, about faith restored, and about a dog who reminded us what loyalty looks like." There was a pause. Then she turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this town owes you a debt, but we understand that it wasn't only your courage that brought this truth to light." She gestured toward Max. "To the brave soul who protected one of our own. Even when his own life was at risk, our town presents this, a token of our gratitude." She knelt, and from a polished wooden box she drew out a medal. It was brass, shaped like a paw, with the words K9 Guardian of Pine Ridge engraved on it. The ribbon was navy blue. Ethan crouched beside Max and clipped the medal gently to the dog's collar. Max blinked, tilted his head, then stood proudly. A child in the front row clapped, and soon the whole field erupted in applause. Later that evening, as dusk turned the snow to gold, Ethan stood watching Max bound through the powder. He hadn't run like that since before the injury. The medal glinted as he leapt, paws kicking up flakes. Around them, laughter and warmth rose from bonfires and lanterns. Jamie, still quiet, sketched in a worn notepad by one of the benches. Nora was serving hot chocolate beside Deputy Reed. Ethan turned when Marcus stepped beside him. "Thought of a name for him yet?" the agent asked. Ethan smiled. "Yeah, Shadow. He's not just Max anymore. He's something more, a part of this place." As if on cue, Shadow turned back, tail high, and ran straight toward Ethan, leaping once before settling at his feet with a satisfied huff. In that moment, everything felt still. Not empty, not broken, just quiet. The kind of quiet that meant peace. In the quiet town of Pine Ridge, what began with a wounded dog and a grieving man became something far greater, a story of redemption, courage, and the unseen hand of grace. Shadow's loyalty, Nora's resilience, Ethan's quiet strength, and the community's awakening remind us that even in the darkest winter, God plants seeds of hope. Maybe it wasn't just fate that led Ethan to that alley. Maybe it was something divine, a miracle wrapped in fur and scars, reminding us that healing sometimes arrives in the most unexpected form. Shadow was more than a dog. He was a messenger, a guardian, and a symbol of how faith can walk beside us on four legs. In our everyday lives, we may not always see the miracles unfolding, but they are there, in acts of kindness, in second chances, in quiet prayers answered when we least expect it. All it takes is a heart willing to believe. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment Amen if you believe that God sends guardians in many forms, sometimes with paws and a wagging tail. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, and the power of love. And may God bless and protect every soul who reads or watches this. You're never alone. Miracles still happen. Just ask Shadow.